In this episode, I'm excited to have a chat with Marc Beneteau about relational intelligence, authentic relating, circling, and Marc's honest telling of the end to his, quote, 40-year war against himself and against the world. First, if you're enjoying Dose of Depth podcast, please like, subscribe, and share your favorite episodes, and maybe consider supporting my production of free content as a Dose of Depth $5 monthly supporter. I'll include the links below. Marc Beneteau is the author of 4 books covering various topics in relational intelligence, emotional communication, sexuality, and human potentials. He is a self-described love revolutionary and former relational idiot, which, according to him, is not a bad qualification for the job of being a relational leader. His recent book is a memoir titled Broke, Single, Crazy, and Old: The Redemption of a Sex and Love Addict. Marc retired from the tech field in late 2021 and now works full-time writing, speaking, and is involved with culture change projects. His special interest is in the authentic, relating, and intentional community spaces. You're going to learn about that. You can find interesting information on Marc's website, including an introduction to relational power and an introduction to the circling guide. I'll include all those links below too. I literally bumped into Marc's work. It was fall of 2016. I had just secured my master's in depth psychology and was accepted into the PhD program. My 24-year marriage technically had ended about 6 months earlier, and I got myself swept up in the most ironic love affair with a man 17 years younger. That's all in my coming memoir titled When Sex Meets God, a Midlife Story. Anyway, I was at the bookstore. I backed up into Marc's book. It was a numinous experience, and my soul was being nourished as I read the book titled As Lovers Do: Sexual and Romantic Partnership as a Path of Transformation. It was written as a manual for men to create deep love and powerful sex with any woman, but I didn't read it as a manual for men at all. I read it as a beautiful exploration of the fluidity of the inner masculine and feminine inside all of us. It was one of the best books on relationships that I had ever read. Over the next year during my PhD courses, I was led to my topic of research. I certainly would never have thought of it on my own, but exploring women's experience of reconciling sexuality and spirituality through the Jungian theory of individuation ended up being the task of my midlife unraveling and reconstruction. The book gave me a framework to understand my own receptive feminine, which is not passive, by the way. To receive is a choice. Coming into deeper relationship with my unconscious, my feminine, and giving my masculine a break led to my creative unleashing. It also helped me understand a period where a fantasy of sexual submission was torturing me. That's all in the memoir too. I still recommend Marc's book on a regular basis to a lot of people. I know my conversation with Marc will be juicy, vulnerable, and even humorous, which is the best way to survive a transformative experience. So let's get started. Welcome, Marco. How are you doing today?
Hi, Deborah. I'm very excited to be with you today.
I am too. I'm excited about
and
that.
also kind of nervous, I'll be honest with you. We'll talk about the As Lovers Do. I have sort of a tiny cult following for that, surprisingly, but it hasn't really done anything commercially. So to talk about that book and other books too is very exciting for me. I don't get a lot of attention around it.
Well, good. No, when I reached out to you, I was like, you don't know this, but I'm a groupie. So I think that's what you mean by a little cult following. So why don't we start by you just telling my audience a little bit about like what's going on in your life, what's happening, and what kind of initiatives, and just a general introduction of you.
Cool. Deborah, I don't know how much my story would be appropriate to tell. I'll just give you sort of the last chapter, which is that I'm very passionate about intentional community, and the bank took back the community that Rebecca and I formed in Philadelphia and ran relatively successfully for 6 years in 2013. And I've been on a sort of a worldwide quest to looking for community and intentional community particularly. And I landed in Mexico last July, and shortly afterwards I found sort of this residential hotel where I'm now living, where I'm basically starting an authentic relating intentional community. So these are my two great joys are authentic relating and intentional community. So to bring them together, I'm a happy camper. There's challenges, of course, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing. The other thing is my authentic relating career kind of took off in January. So I discovered authentic relating in 2016 at the Boulder Integral Center when it was still operating. It was an amazing place. Tell you about that another time maybe. And I've been, I've kind of fallen in love with the practice, and I've been leading groups for 7 years, mostly informal groups to my friends. But I started leading professionally in January of this year. I do a program called Practical Relational Leadership, which is like a 4-week deep dive into circling within the authentic relating tradition. And people are buying these programs, and they're super fun. And I got programs on the ground here as well. And also now we got 2 courses that are being produced by Global Eco Village Network in the Federation of Intentional Communities. So that's a big deal. There's 70,000 emails going out next week advertising these 2 courses.
Wow.
So I can hardly believe it.
That's a lot. And we're going to dig into intentional communities and authentic relating a little more. That's a great introduction. So, okay. So that's a lot of stuff going on that we'll dig into a little bit more with some of the details. So there are so many, as I was on your website, there are so many things that popped out to me in your introduction to relational power. And one of the things that I hadn't really heard someone describe before was how you described your unique way of being. And I hadn't heard of the term characterology before. But I love how in hindsight, for you, it was so obvious that, well, of course, this is where my path was going to take me, but you don't know it when you're on the path. And that this, has been your path to self. And you quote C.G. Jung as saying, I am as I am. And I just
Yes,
love
I am.
that.
Yep.
So, of course, and I think about me too, that of course there's so much irony after it all happens. But if you knew how ridiculous it was, you wouldn't do it. So you have to go with those, getting swept up experience. So tell us about this 40-year war with yourself and the world, whatever you want to share. But I love that quote.
Yeah, so the full quote is the 40-year war against myself and against the world, trying to make a
Yeah.
buck and get a little love, mostly unsuccessfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
But
it.
so you talk about characterology. I'm sort of on the autism spectrum. I don't know if they still use the word Asperger's, but and I didn't even know this till my mid-40s. So I'm like a very high functioning Asperger's. Um, but I've always been challenged by relationships, but also been fascinated by relationships as well, which sort of fits into my Enneagram 4. So Enneagram 4s, we tend to be fascinated by your inner emotional experience, sometimes to the exclusion of other things, which makes it somewhat challenging to
Yep.
relationships, right? Do you know your Enneagram, Deborah? Have we talked about this?
I don't, but I'm an INFJ, so I'm very enamored with my inner world, and unless I can find a way to have this like deep connection with someone else, I might be really bored.
Yeah, well, your Myers-Briggs is part of your characterology. I'm also an
Yeah.
INFJ, by the way, and so was my Russian fiance that I talk about in my book. So
Okay.
I'm very fond of INFJs.
I
So that's part of
well,
your characterology. Yeah. So I've always been very challenged by relationships, but also absolutely fascinated by relationships. And I grew up in Italy in a very large family. I'm one of 6 children. And I had a sort of a father who was on the bipolar spectrum. I'm also on the bipolar spectrum, so I inherited that. But I was perfectly happy until the age of 13, and then moved to Canada. Puberty hit, social acceptance hit, and I've been trying to get back to that childhood happiness state ever since, mostly unsuccessfully.
yeah.
But so I've struggled with mental health issues. I had sort of a very really unbearable 10-year depression in my mid 20s to early 30s that actually
Mm.
coincided with the loss of a relationship. You know, she's my first girlfriend. She's mentioned in the book she's called Alexa in the book.
Mm.
You know, but I, you know, very, I was just completely clueless to, you know, just completely clueless.
Yeah.
It was beyond the pale, shall we say? And it wasn't actually till I got in touch with the Lafayette Morehouse and Victor Bronco and met my wife Rebecca in was it early 2000s? Yeah, in the early 2000s that I started getting some basic man-woman education, and it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I found authentic relating that I actually got a basic emotional literacy education. So I've come a long way. And
Yeah.
now I actually lead lead groups in authentic relating, which was just kind of mind-boggling considering where I came from.
Well,
I also call myself an idiot savant, but
I
that phrase does have savant in it.
I like it. Well, you know that saying, that's so true, that we teach what we learn, what we need to learn, right? So,
Exactly.
right. So, I had to learn how to reconcile my sexuality and spirituality and come back into relationship with my feminine, and I had a very like one-sided developed masculine. And so, that's what I'm teaching, because I'm probably always going to keep circling around that need to do that. So, that's what I mean. It's ironic, but it's like, well, of course that had to happen that way. So, your story reminds me of an interview I recently did. Her name is Cher Griffin. And she created, or is creating, in community on Facebook, a compassion collective, it's called. I think it's part of a larger movement. She describes herself as a late diagnosed autistic person in her 30s, and sort of self diagnosed. And even before that, when she was a child, she was labeled, or she was considered to be gifted, but she wasn't in a place where there were opportunities to actually, for her to express that and get any sort of guidance around that. So then she kind of was a misfit, right? And then I think she was about 20, and she was in a relationship that she discovered was dysfunctional. And she had also developed a relationship with a substance, so substance abuse. And so she started connecting dots. And between this, we could just say, in a way, it's like we're misfits when we're not accepted, right? And normal isn't really relevant, because normal just means norm. Norm doesn't mean good, right? But that part of her journey is like, you know, though not being able to be authentically her led her to medicate, I guess, to sort of find, like, it was just too frustrating, right? And so as she started self-diagnosing, and she's ADHD too, so she has all that. She's so amazing. And she's another person that has a deep connection with her inner world. And so, there's a purpose. I've often said that, what do autistic people mirror back to society? Well, because they're deeply connected with their inner world, sometimes to the exclusion of being able to connect outside, it's almost like they're luring you into their world. And that's the point, not to fix them and have them adapt to the community, but really to have the community, come into their inner world and then your own inner world. So anyway, so this just reminds me of her, and how there's a place like all us misfits have in the chaos of today, right? So we can't rely on the old systems. So anyway, that just reminds me
Yeah.
of that. So thanks for sharing. So help my listeners understand what relational intelligence is, and authentic relating, and like, what is it? What does that look like? And also, you'll bring in circling. So if I'm understanding it correctly, circling, this is how I'm reading it, is like an experience or a method, I guess, that facilitates this deeper connection that's required for authentic relating. And, what does it look like and feel like to be authentically relating to yourself and others? It's so complex. And my clients and my listeners are used to me talking about projection, how we can't help but project. That's just how we relate. But what we want to do is sort of become aware of what other people are mirroring back to us. For us, what is our unconscious asking us to explore by having a certain experience with someone? So So yeah, so just bring those concepts to life for my listeners.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to, Deborah. That's
Yeah,
the I think the only my only challenge is trying to give you sort of a compact
I know.
version, but because it's so complex and it's so
Or tell
rich.
us,
So
or tell a story. You know, sometimes a story helps us do that too.
sure,
So
sure.
yeah,
Well,
for
so
everybody.
authentic relating, it's many things. First of all, it's a global movement. It's about 20 years old. There's 30,000 strong. There's three major schools that teach the practice of circling. Circling is one of the practices of the authentic relating movement. Um, it's um, it's a little bit like a next generation NVC, possibly nonviolent communication. It's about having more intentionality about how we do relationships, and particularly includes being more aware of our impact on other people and being more aware of other people's impact on
Mm,
us and being able to express or process that with truth and care.
mm,
So truth and care in my world, or the masculine and feminine poles of love, which is sort of another conversation we can have. Um, so it's a very, very powerful practice. I mean, I've been doing it nonstop for 7 years, and it never gets old. In fact, it just keeps on getting better. You know, I've got groups that I've been running for 5 years. I have a men's group that been running for 5 years. It keeps on getting better. It's kind of an incredible practice. Another way to put it, it's a presence practice. So it's simply about we gather in a group for however long, an hour, 2 hours, it depends. It works very well for up to 6 people in a room, but there are people who do it in much larger groups as well. I prefer the smaller groups personally. It lasts an hour to an hour and a half, and it's all it is. It's just we become aware of what happening inside us in relation to other people. So it's a presence practice in the moment, and we just basically process that with love. That's the bottom line.
Oh, I love that. So can you share an example, like even with your own experience, or maybe because you've been doing this for a while. So when you were first introduced to it, like what happened in an experience when you were doing that, when you were in presence with another person, and
Yeah, sure.
what did you notice? Like how did you learn to what to notice, and then how did you engage with that?
Well, let's just do a little
Yeah.
demonstration.
Okay.
Let's just do a little
Oh,
demonstration now.
great.
So I got a little bit of fluttery in my stomach. Am I going to sound stupid here?
Mm,
Um, I'm nervous. Um, I'm excited. Um, it's it's very difficult to explain the practice.
mm-hmm.
You can't actually teach circling; you can only model it.
Yeah.
And it's also called, we call it dropping into connection. So dropping into connection is it's this sense of disappearing of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you feel like everyone has had this experience, I think. Um, in It's also just intimacy. It's straight up intimacy. Everyone knows what that is, but it's very hard to describe,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
this is the problem in circling. It's a sort of a practice or a frame for people going really deep together.
Okay. So you were just expressing how you were experiencing, and that includes what's happening with your body. So fluttering, a nervousness in the stomach, and so really just maybe bringing words and articulating and sort of putting that on the table, because of course we all have a mask, right? Like I have no idea that you're nervous. You're very composed, right? And I'm super curious. So like mine, like how I'm feeling is curious. Like I'm like, oh
Yeah, cool. So
yeah.
you're circling right now. So
Okay.
in the reveal that you're curious, I'm feeling fear,
Okay.
and fear and excitement both, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm basically anxiety. What's the expression is anxiety is just excitement gone bad or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oh, excitement and fear is what I feel a lot of right now, because I am about to launch a new offering for my business. So I'm taking my business to a new level. And so there's an excitement about doing that. And then there's a fear about doing it right. Right. I'm not afraid of like if it doesn't go right, because I can deal with that. But it's like still this little twinge of like, oh, am I doing it right? So
Right.
so
And I'm
really,
gonna
yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna say like one thing I like about you is Deborah, is like you kind of lay it on the line. Like I've read your memoir, like
Yeah.
you talk very openly about all your sexual
Mhm.
fantasies and escapades and all of that. And that's, to me, that's attractive. So and also sort of just what you said to me now, like you're excited and about this business launch. You're sort of a natural, authentic, relating person from my perspective, because you kind of lay it on the line. And
Oh,
there
okay.
comes a point in the practice where you just say, oh, what the hell? I'm just going to be me. Maybe they'll like me. Maybe they won't, but I won't.
Well, I wasn't always like that. So in a way, like I always just kind of did what I did and I accepted the consequences. I'm a terribly self-conscious person and I am shy, especially in a romantic setting, but I don't let it stop anything. But I did have a kind of persona and I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't even vulnerable with my own husband. I remember the
Mm,
first time after, I think we had been married 15 years. And I remember the first time of sharing something that caused me to feel vulnerable. So I think that was part of one of the lessons I had to learn in my falling apart was to crack that open and get to the point where I just had to get to the place of pure vulnerability. And I remember when I was purposely or intentionally realized that the feeling of awkwardness, and I would teach this to my consulting clients. I'd say, I'm going to teach you how to do something new. And at first, you're going to feel stupid. Let me just tell you, you're going to feel stupid. Just, okay, just know it. It's okay. You're going to feel stupid. But you know what? When you do it the second time, you'll feel less stupid. And then eventually you'll feel competent. I'm just going to tell you how you're going to feel. So now you can go ahead and do what I'm telling you to do.
yeah,
So
beautiful.
I was teaching other people to build a capacity or a relationship with awkwardness, not knowing that that's what I needed to learn, right? And so during a certain point of getting back out there and dating and getting swept up, I realized that I was awkward all the time. And I thought, that's because I'm having a new experience. So if I'm not having a new experience, I'm not feeling awkward. That's not good. If I'm never feeling awkward, I'm actually not having a new experience. And then awkward is like a lighter version of vulnerable. So there's awkwardness, and then it's like, oh, okay, all right, let's do the vulnerable thing. And that's even a little scarier. So yeah, I wasn't always like that. I've always been really engaging and interested in connecting with people. But, it's common for INFJs, they say, and I think this is true, that with an INFJ, if you don't actually intentionally want to know them, you will never know them because
Mm.
I present as an extrovert. I don't know, I present in just a way that easily adapts. And so unless people like are really want to know me, they probably won't know me. So yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that. Okay, I like demonstrating to my listeners, like, what does this mean? What does this concept mean? So circling is like the sharing then, this kind of communicating back about the impact of the situation and each other on each other and just kind
Well,
of
it's
reflecting.
about, yeah, it's about being more intentional in how we do
Okay.
relationship. It's prioritizing connection. It's interested questions. It's empathic reflections. You seem a little sad now. How did that land on what I just
Okay.
said? It's kind of like, once you do it and once you get good at it, you kind of wonder why. First of all, you do it all the time with
Mhm.
everyone you meet. And second, you kind of wonder why don't people do that more? Why don't
Yeah.
people ask interested questions? Why don't they give empathic reflections? And it's
Mm.
kind of shocking and sad that it's actually so rare in the world to give and receive deep attention from people. And
Yeah.
I personally, I can feel the sadness right now
Yeah.
as I say that. Like, why? And this is a little bit of the Asperger's experience too. Like, why are it's like this obsession of like, why is this happening? Why are
Yeah.
people not seeing the obvious thing that I see, which is we're
Right.
all going about in the world looking to love and be loved,
Yeah.
and we express that by showing an interest in people. and trying to get to know them and trying to bring out the best of them.
Well, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Carol Gilligan's book about why patriarchy persists. And she talks about, because of course, patriarchy is not as much about men and women now as it's about these systems of hierarchy and how they're reinforced by ranking and all. So that like everybody walks around in fear of really being authentic. But she says that we're not necessarily want to be that way, but now like being that way is a defense mechanism a protective. And in fact, that reminds me of my colleague, my male PhD philosophy studies sexuality through a philosophical lens. And he shared with me that there's research that shows that men, like good men who believe in equality, overestimate the sexism of their friends, even in their own peer group. They estimate or they assume that their own friends and colleagues and coworkers are more sexist than they actually are. And so think about how we're suppressing, right? So, and why? Because men can be cruel to other men, right? And emasculate them when they come out as, showing a more feminine sensibility or belief in equality or whatever it is. So it takes a leader then. And I learned when I was the executive director of this region of Playworks that I was at the point where I was just me. And my team of 24, and they're all younger people, really appreciate, like I knew I really had them the more that I shared about my own self-reflections about my silly self. So the more I was able to like share my moments of awkwardness and learning, it really deeply connected with them and they trusted me so much because of that. And then I created space for them. So it's almost like somebody has to start, I guess, right? Somebody has to start and then give permission for other people to come out a little bit as themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful, Deborah. And the irony is that vulnerability. I mean, Brené Brown, of course, has built a huge platform of this, and it's tricky to do it. It's tricky to do it, but in almost every case, it to show up with truth, with more truth and care, and including vulnerability, you're not just going to be happier. You're going to be much more effective as in business. And this is why I'm such a fanatic, shall we say, for this global movement, which I really think has the power to change the world as we know it. My goal is to get authentic relating into every corner of the world. So let's hope that this project succeeds.
I love it. Definitely. Well, people are getting a little taste today. So I think
Yeah.
they probably get a taste. I think I'm kind of doing that in all my interviews with people. So
Yeah. Well, for sure. Well, of course you are. And also your
yeah,
memoir and all your
yeah,
interviews. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
So, okay. So one of my favorite topics is the deeper meaning of sexual attraction and arousal. And that when we, in my words, willingly surrender to these archetypal energies that want to use us as a vessel, that it can feel arousing. That's my experience. And for me, during this phase, it was surrendering. It was this like feeling of surrendering to something transcendent as I was meditating that led to this numinous experience where there was like like in my imagination, I'm like cold light. I can't tell, is it coming in my head or is it going out of my head? Like what is happening? But I could feel this was I guess my coming into relationship with vulnerability, because I had walked around based on my childhood feeling that I was the only one that could do me. Like I was alone, I guess, doing everything alone, which is really not true. And so there was this moment where I felt the relief of a burden for figuring out my life on my own without partnering with creative intelligence or whatever you want to call it. And so that was like what led to this like this experience that was so arousing for me. And I mean, I had to like bring myself to orgasm, and it happened like 3 times. It's like, that's a spiritual orgasm because it was coming into relationship with myself, like my core, my tender core, which is also like this bridge, how I describe this bridge to whatever, the divine or God, quantum realm, whatever you want to call it. So it's like, and then I thought, well, of course that would be arousing, being intimate with yourself and with the creator. Like, why wouldn't that be arousing? But I sort of kept it to myself for a while because I thought I was a little crazy. So, but then that led me to be more aware of like arousal. And I didn't realize that this was probably me. This was, if I look back, an experience I always had. I am aroused by intellectual conversations. So literally, I can like just feel all warm and tingly because I'm having an intellectual conversation. But one of the things I really want, people to understand more is that we don't have a good relationship with arousal. We make assumptions about it, like what it's there for, what we should do with it, right? And being aroused is like an experience of creating. It doesn't necessarily mean like you want to have sex with some person. So the first time I became aware of this, I was with a colleague at the bar and we're having a beer and I loved our conversations. And during this time I was like, oh my gosh, inside my head I'm going, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel aroused? And I thought, am I attracted to him? Like, I don't think so. And I imagined kissing him and I'm like, no. But how could, like, what is this? And I became really really curious about like what is the role of arousal and pleasure in our human experience. So anyway, we were talking before this about romantic friendships. So that reminds me of that. And that's very difficult. This whole like being, friends with men and women. And sometimes there is this like sexual energy that you don't make it. You don't do it on purpose. It's just there. But it can be very threatening if we don't understand like what is that about? And we can feel guilty or we can act on it and then we feel guilty when really it's not there for the reason that we think it is. So anyway, I'm just curious about like what you have to say about romantic friendships or wherever you want to go with that.
Sure. And well, arousal is such a interesting topic. It operates in so many dimensions. There can be intellectual arousal, there can be sexual arousal, there can be
Mhm.
emotional arousal. And, for me, they all kind of flow into each other and it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter because it's so much fun, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yes,
I
it's fun to feel that way.
and I noticed also in your previous podcasts, you talk about being with someone that you have a sort of an intellectual arousal with,
Mhm.
and you start to feel sexual, which is which
Yeah,
is quite which is quite interesting, but probably quite common. And
right.
just feeling sexual doesn't necessarily mean you want to hop into bed. It just means you have excitement.
Mhm.
And I find emotional intimacy and connection arousing.
Mm.
And I've made a profession of making it happen, so that's no accident. And everyone has a desire for connection. Everyone enjoys emotional intimacy. I mean, some people are, so scared that they don't go there, but everyone enjoys that. But for some reason, and we get back to characterology. For me, um, this is the thing I live for. And if I don't get it, I get depressed. Like, if
Mm.
I don't have friends around that I can have interesting and stimulating conversations with, I get depressed. And this has been a big problem in my life at different times. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking about myself. I mean, I think that's why I enjoy doing my Dose of Depth podcast, because I get a steady diet of just having juicy conversations with people and connecting. And then also being a depth psychology coach, the magic of facilitating connection with self for people that then can allow them to connect more easily with another person. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've chosen the perfect profession for you
Yeah.
too, which is fantastic. And I mean, the other thing I
Finally.
want to say is that this sort of relates to sexuality and its archetypal or transformational dimensions, but the all of the most profound and transformational experiences of my life um, are related to the women I've loved and who have loved me. And there's probably seven of them. One of them was non-sexual. Um, I am the man I am today because of these women, which includes, most recently my ex-wife, Rebecca. Um, we're very good friends, and I'm very fond of her.
Yeah.
um, and there's something, and I read about it in the memoir as well, that there's something kind of numinous about that, to use Carl Jung's favorite word and my favorite word as well. It's something that pertains to the divine, to some kind of archetypal energy that somehow takes over.
Yes.
And sort of the phenomenon of being in love is a particular form of that, which is extremely powerful. And we sort of could unpack that a little bit too, if you want. But just to say that, I've had, obviously I've had many, many relationships in my life, but it was those 7 that really transformed me more than anything else. And there was some power to those relationships that I don't fully understand, but there's no question that it was there.
Yeah. So as you talk about those 7 relationships, is that have to do with your framework of the epics? So is there a way that you can like share with my listeners like what sort of what were the lessons, right? Like the first one. I really do believe that there is this unconscious hidden purpose to 2 people being together.
Right.
But and that it's not what we think it is, right? Relationship is meant to facilitate a kind of psychological spiritual growth. And then we relate and projection, and we do this process. Most people aren't aware of what's really going on. And that the point is not that the relationship is permanent. It could be, but that's not really the point. The point is that the growth happens. And so often when I'm doing work with my clients who are done with a relationship or divorced, and now they're kind of obsessed about finding the one, and I say, well, what if it's not about finding the one? Maybe it's the one for now, the one that facilitates the growth that you need, that actually prepares you for a higher level of relationship or a different kind of relationship. So I wonder if that's like, you can see that thread through your relationships, that each one sort of prepared you and is why you attracted the next woman, and whatever happened there, the transformation is why then that particular woman showed up and had that transformative effect on you.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. That's beautiful. Thanks for that. I mean, again, there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but I'm absolutely convinced that all of my relationships happen for a reason and were maybe even engineered by spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you mentioned epoch. So I have another theory is that my life and maybe everybody's life goes in what I call epochs or developmental phases.
Mm-hmm.
For me, they typically last between 7 and 10 years. And so I'm 64 now. I probably had 5 or 6 epochs since my maturation, shall we say. And every one of these epochs was demarcated by a woman. And like you say, I'm going to quote my mentor Viktor Frankl, who's also, we'll just bookmark that as well. But he says the goal of relationship is not longevity. The goal of relationship is not longevity. The goal of
I
relationship
love him.
the goal of relationship is aliveness. It's transformation.
Yeah.
It's insight. It's connection, right?
Yeah.
And the search for the one, it's kind of a losing game, actually.
Yeah. It's kind of like you're looking for an easy way out. That's kind of what I think about it, because it does take a lot of courage to go through relationships. Transformation isn't it, I mean, it's everything, but it's not always like fun and light. It's also heavy, but it is fully living if you're able to go through those different, phases of it's like each one includes the 6 elements of storytelling, right? There's the exposition. Okay, here's where we are in my life. There's the inciting incident. There's a progressive complication. There's a climax. There's a decision, a choice that you make where you either go this way or that way. And then there's this like sort of like lull, reconciliation of some kind. But then what? We got to circle back and do a little more. We got to go deeper, right? So,
Right,
and
right.
then, yeah. So, but
Yeah,
it is,
it's like a mini hero's journey. But
yeah,
from my perspective, you go through an epoch, you get the learning, you clear the trauma, and then you go into the next one,
yeah.
a wiser and more loving and more powerful human being. And now, just as an aside, I say all of my epochs have been demarcated by women except for the last one. The last one was 2013 to about now. There was no primary woman, but I did write 4 books. So that was sort of an interesting factoid there.
Well, that was your lover right there. I mean, right? How could you even have been in relationship then?
Maybe.
I feel like sort of like my unconscious is keeping people away from me over these last couple of years so that like all of that energy is going into creating something else. And I'm just like, okay, I'll just trust you on this. At some point, somebody else is going to come my way and I'm going to be swept up again. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Well, that is a love affair
Yeah, I love that.
to
Thank you.
pump out a
It's
book like that. Yeah.
almost like
Or
your inner wisdom is taking over, Deborah. Yeah.
absolutely. So, okay, so let's talk about your memoir. I love the title, Broke, Single, Crazy and Old: The Redemption of a Sex and Love Addict. Like that's going to be a great movie. And the description says the central part relates to two women you were in love with between 93 and 99. One of them was in your local community in Montreal and the other in Russia. And there's this love triangle. Triangles, my colleague, Dr. Jolie Hamilton, her research, she explored uh, three. She explored the jealousy. She explored jealousy through this image of three, through a depth psychology perspective. And then I love this. You describe the book as reflections on your development from the relational idiot with little empathy into the wisdom of your later years, leading to your redemption. And that the book is more than a memoir. It's part cultural critique and part self-help manual, offering little known teachings on love, sexuality, and man woman psychology that you've gathered over 20 years of diving into the human potential movement. So I'm curious about, when and why, and like what was a little inciting incident that caused you to write this book, and, and then, what was the aha that the world needs this story? And, did it happen one day, or was it the course of, a time period? Like, tell me how it came about.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because the memoir is actually the first book that I wrote chronologically because it's been 20 years in the writing,
Oh,
and I sort of finally pulled it together 2 years ago. And the story of that, this happened, the events chronicled in that, in the sort of the main part of the memoir, it relates to, two women I was in love with from my early 30s until my, maybe 30, 38. And, bear in mind that I was, still a man, woman, idiot then. Uh, it wasn't until I met Veronica that I sort of got some basic sexual intelligence, shall we say, in terms of understanding the polarities, which we can talk about. And it wasn't until I discovered authentic relating in 2016 that I developed some measure of competency in emotional communication. So of course you can't really do a relationship with the opposite sex if you don't have emotional literacy. Um, but if you don't have sexual literacy either, like if you don't really understand how men and women are different, it's also quite
yeah.
difficult, as you
Yeah.
know. So anyway, so what happened is I was in love with this woman. She's called Ellen in the book for 5 or 6 years, and I'd asked her to be with me 3 times, and she always said no, and finally said, "The hell with it, I'm out of here." And I took a big travel adventure. I went to Russia, and I met a woman there, and over the course of the next year, became engaged to her and was about to, was about to bring her back to the U.S. to marry her, which is kind of a big deal, by the way.
Mm.
And sort of the week before I was supposed to go back to Russia to marry Sasha, Ellen came back to my life and she said, "Take me."
Oh man, I love it.
And I did the stupidest thing I ever did in my life, which was to say yes. And she did the stupidest thing that she ever did in her life, was to come back to me. And we had a disaster relationship, but I learned a lot. It was really the primary developmental experience of my life, and I sort of my maturation into really becoming the person I am. So I want to say a couple things. And in terms of redemption, I am a work in progress.
We all
So
are.
redemption might be a bit stretching, but yeah, nonetheless, there's no question I'm a hell of a lot wiser and smarter person, and perhaps more humble as well than I was 20 years ago. But also, I'm kind of a philosopher of love and sex as well. My practice still has some needs to work out the kinks, shall we say. I mean, I've been single for 10 years despite my deepest desire, which is to find a partner. I've always said, thought to myself, like, I'm not made to go old alone. It's not my game, guys. It's not going to happen. But I haven't really had any success whatsoever in the last 10 years. So I have a lot of good ideas, but the good ideas don't immediately necessarily translate to practice. So I'm still working on this, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I love it. Oh, I love it. So, okay. Can you, I was wondering if you could share a technique or just an activity, something that my listeners could try out, something that they can take away and try that has to do to explore this idea of authentic relationship and connection. So it could be, two romantic partners, two people who are married, or it could be like people who are business partners or siblings, or I don't know, maybe it can apply to all the relationships, but something that they can try that they'll have an experience that they haven't had before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's all kinds of authentic relating games they could play. There's games you can play in a group. You know what? I'll give you a fun game to play on somebody's birthday.
Oh,
We
good.
actually had a party here at the commune last week. It was super fun. You put on what's called the hot seat, and from the hot seat they answer questions from the audience. So you have one person who directs the questions. So if you have a question, you raise your hand, you get called on by the director, and you ask the question. And the person on the hot seat can answer truthfully or decline to answer or take the question in a completely different direction. And
Okay.
it's a fun intimacy game, and it's particularly fun to play on somebody's birthday because the, the the birthday person gets all of the focus of the group, and gets to be seen and gets
Yeah.
to it can be very fun. It can be very connecting, and it kind of breaks the social ice of, when you're in a party, sometimes, you may be talking, but you don't really know whether someone's interested, or,
Mm,
maybe someone talking to you, and, maybe you're talking, they're not really listening. They're just really just looking for an excuse to come in with their own
yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
This happens a lot. In the hot seat game, it changes that because there's an explicit agreement that you're going to give attention, and you're going to hear back, so there's no the back and forth conversation. It's very
Mm,
focused, and it actually works. And sometimes you could do what's called a love shower as well, is to tell someone all the things you appreciate that about them, and all, and that's also really fun to do on somebody's birthday as well. So these are some example authentic relating games that anyone can do. um
I love it.
there's all kinds of games you could do while waiting in line for a movie or in the car.
Mm,
um you can do what I call sort of a mini circle. So a mini circle is a vulnerable share followed by impact appreciation. So that's a fundamental circling structure. But the idea is one person gets the attention,
okay.
and the other person provides provides attention or affection or love or whatever. And this is something you can do as well with your friends. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I love it. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Playworks. So Playworks is a national nonprofit that partners with schools, and their program transforms school climate through being intentional about building community on the playground. And so it's so the data, the research, it's just amazing. But because we did this with schools, we lived our values, and play was an important part of our work culture. So we had scheduled recesses, and we never opened up a meeting without doing some kind of check-in that had to do like silly questions like, if you had a superpower, what would it be and why? And like you just learned, or if you were a plant, what kind of plant would you be? I just did this for a consulting project. And it immediately, like, I don't know, just immediately puts you on a human level. So you're connecting as people before then you do your business. And we would also do I guess the love, whatever you're saying, where one person, I want to go. So Carolyn, and everyone said something nice to her. And it's just amazing how that really works. Like, you're right. Like, why don't we do this? Why wouldn't? Now, I also just started a reflection about myself. And I wonder if I do this for me. Like, you think you're doing things altruistically sometimes when really it's just you're meeting your own need. I have this thing, and other people notice that wherever I go, like if I'm going through the drive-through at McDonald's, I need to find something interesting about that person. And so I might say, your nails are so cool. Like, how did you get those stones on there? Or your eyes are beautiful. And it's not that I'm making it up, though. I'm not saying, oh, I must do this and just pick something. It really is like this thing where I just can find something like to compliment somebody on, no matter where they are or what they're doing or whatever it is. So now and of course they love it. Are you kidding me? When you say somebody who's working at McDonald's, like, I love your smile. They're like, oh, so I guess that's like really powerful, even doing something that small.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah,
me feel good.
love that. I mean, we're talking about authentic relating. I like to say, there's a very simple technique that will sort of double, that will make you a good AR leader right out the gate. Double your appreciations and positive impact statements to people.
Mm,
So to have a positive impact towards someone and not to tell it is both stupid and cruel. It's cruel
yeah,
because you could actually change their life, and it's stupid because you could basically make an ally out of them just by telling people
practically. Right.
how you
Yeah.
feel about them. It's
Right.
not rocket science.
It is so true. That also reminds me, we did another thing at Playworks where it was this concept of putting deposits in somebody's emotional bank account. Well,
Mhm.
we had drops of water. I was the executive director and I was cutting out big construction paper colored drops of water. And so as part of our team, each week we were to hand out at least 5 drops to somebody. And it was finding something to appreciate about them. When my kids were young, I called it catch them doing something right. Why always point out what they're not doing right? Then they're just like get paranoid about being wrong all the time, right? So yeah, so like catch them doing, oh, these are really good ideas that people aren't really doing, but it's just, I don't know, because it's not part of our norm, but it should be part of our norm to treat people
Yeah.
that way. I love it. So, okay. So before we conclude, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Like you said, we could go and have a conversation all day, but is there something that that's at the top of your head that you'd really feel like you'd like to talk about or share or?
Well, we haven't really talked much about as lovers do. Um,
Oh, okay.
but just a couple things about that, if I could. It's like, this is the book. Um, this was my first book. And it's essentially, it's a summary and reconciliation, if you will, of some of the important sexual teachers that I've had in my life. And it's almost like the book that I would have liked to have read
Mm.
when I was 25 years old, when I first met my first girlfriend. Her name is, in the memoir, she's referred to as Alexa. I say that, young men are, as a rule, shockingly and tragically ignorant about women.
Yeah.
Um, maybe less so in these days
Hmm.
than maybe 20, 30 years ago. I'm not sure.
I think
I
less
think
so. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, sexual intelligence and relational intelligence is not something that comes natural. But at least maybe these days, the conversation is a little bit more permissible, shall we say?
Yes. Open. Yeah.
So certainly I was a complete dolt at 25 years old. So I basically, and it took me kind of 20 years to, um, there's a lot of sexual educators out there, and they each have their own thing, but there's not really sort of a common program or unified philosophy, shall we say? And that's sort of
Yeah.
my desire in Lovers Do. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that.
Yeah,
So,
no, I appreciate that. I talked a little bit about my story with the book in the intro,
right.
and that, I mean, I literally bumped into it and I'm like, reading this, I'm like, oh my God, like this is the best book on relationship I ever like read in my life. And it was just, it was how you were talking about it and how you made room for, people who didn't necessarily identify even as one or another gender, which was, you were quite ahead of your time. That was like 2015. But I know what you're saying about sexuality because, there are different lenses, right? There's the biology lens. We could look at sexuality and there's like this, instinctual thing going on. And then there's, but we don't teach sexuality as a way to come to know ourselves, like self-intimacy, self-knowledge through sexuality. And how actually, like most people end up thinking sexuality is about the other and union with the other, when really it's really about, I have to say, I didn't have my spiritual orgasms with a person. I had them with myself and the divine. And then I had other sort of numinous experience with this, that younger man, that I knew it wasn't about him. I knew it was like the divine working through the two of us. I knew it had nothing to do with him. He just happened to be there, matched my whatever my unconscious wanted him as this vessel to make something happen between us. So like sexuality is spiritual and psychological. So there's not like a psycho spiritual, I don't know. I feel like that's really what's missing. And the other thing, coming of age in the 80s, when we're like, yeah, I can have sex like a man. I can do that too. And of course, men didn't know what to do with that necessarily. Someone like didn't like that. And I noticed that there is more freedom, but that the focus is like on quantity and technique, right? Like, oh, look at that. I don't know what's happening there, but anyway, that it's on quantity and technique, and there's something missing. There's some depth, missing to what is the deeper meaning of sexuality, of arousal. And it's not always about acting it out literally. It's symbolic, right? And it's metaphor. And, when we dream of sexual images, they're not usually about literal sex. They're about coming into intimate relationship with ourself. So yeah, so I I
Yeah,
I
and
recommend the
it's
book.
a lot about.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've
Oh,
recommended that book so many times to people, to my clients.
well, thank you. I appreciate that, Deborah.
You're well.
And it's a lot about the inner interplay of masculine and feminine, or yin and yang energies, which of course is very much a very big part of Carl Jung's psychology.
Mhm.
And that, to me, this is utterly fascinating. And I was fascinated by this even before I had my first relationship.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still fascinated by it, actually. And it's still sort of an ongoing work in progress.
Yeah,
Balancing those two energies well.
I
But
agree. I talk about it as like that the goal isn't necessarily balance, but it's more fluidity,
right,
because sometimes you are called to be masculine and other times we need to surrender to mystery of creativity, which isn't done with the mind. We receive, we're receptive to creative energy. And then it's time to bring form to it. That's kind of how I think about it, the masculine, to bring form to it, to communicate it, to articulate it. And that's so, and so that's why, arousal for me is like creative intelligence trying to get my intention. That's kind of how I think about it.
I like
So
that.
yeah, so I don't know. Well, I have really appreciated this conversation. And what's next for you? Well, you just said you got all kinds of stuff going on. So, but what do you want for my listeners? Like, can they follow you someplace? Do you have a newsletter that they can sign up for? Obviously, they can check out your books on your website, and I'll share all those links. But, and I think you're really good at like sharing, knowledge on your website where they can just, oh, what is this relational intelligence thing? And so Yeah. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly any direction you could go is they could go to my website, marcbeneteau.com, and that, that's where I list all my books. But there's probably two, three areas that they can explore. One is the authentic relating, and if they read Relational Power and its precursor that's called Circling Guide, that will tell them all about authentic relating. They can join one of my programs. It's called the Practical Relational Leadership Course.
oh, good.
I do these monthly, and I take up to 6 people in a group, and we drop into very, very deep spaces of connection and transformation together pretty consistently. I mean, it's pretty amazing for me. This is super fun for me. So that's the authentic relating angle. If they're interested in sexual polarity angle or man-woman dynamics, they can read As Lovers Do. And I also have a website, asloversdo.com, with a
Oh,
bunch of writings. I have an article called What Women Want Towards a New Psychology of Love, Sex, and Gender Relations. That's sort of my take on sexual polarity as well. And there's a lot of other cool things too they can read about, Victor Branco and Lafayette Morehouse, and read about the great tragic flaws of masculine and feminine psychology as well, that that I talk
yeah.
about in the memoir.
Oh, I love it.
And
So in my newsletter, what I think I'm going to do is like pull out like the link to the course. That sounds like I think some people might be interested in, and just some specific links to help them maybe be a little bit more targeted about what they might check out on your website. So,
well, thank you. The memoir is fun. I mean, I sort of have done nothing to market it because I wasn't sure that anyone would be interested in the tortured meanderings
yeah.
of my psyche, right? Like, was this a pure narcissistic exercise, or did it really have any value? But I've gotten feedback that people have enjoyed it. So the memoir, it's a good read.
I think people like those stories. I just recently met a man who's probably, well, I don't want to make him older than he is, but I don't know, maybe he's 35, something like that. And he had a really bad breakup, that kind of breakup where you go, everything I thought was true is not true. Like like it was devastating to him. And he realized he was an asshole. Like he literally says that. So he started doing all this journaling about his past relationships and about himself. He put it on the internet and he said, "Hey, women, will you please like tell me what you think about this?" And I thought, wow, that's like so vulnerable for a man who was sort of caught up in that man thing to do. And he said, "I thought I'd get one answer." And I'm like, what? Well, then you really didn't know women. Like they'd all say the same thing. And he said, they all said different things, but there were some themes. So he wrote this little book, and it's really like a self-reflection book. And now he's developing a program to help other men sort of, change, yeah, it's sort of, so I think people appreciate when men share stories of vulnerability. So maybe that's why you might be surprised by some people wanting, because women, we like to talk about all that stuff, but it's less comes from men, to put that kind of story out there. So I think more people appreciate it than you
Yeah.
think. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for having this juicy chat full of depth.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun, and I mean, you did jog something in me. Is that that is the extraordinary gift that women provide to men, is mirroring them, in both their brilliance and also assholeness. And we men, we don't always appreciate it to the degree that I think we should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah,
Well, and then there's the whole woman side too, right? So, I remember one thing that Brene Brown said that really stuck with me was, I think her early research was all about women. And she started having men coming up and saying, well, what about my vulnerability? What about my shame? And she's like, oh, oh. And so, she later on had this quote. She says, women say they want men to show vulnerability, but when they do, they can't stomach it. Right. So women can just be bitches too. Women aren't nice to men sometimes. So that's why we
no,
we really need like this reconciliation between each other. So
yeah,
anyway,
beautiful.
well, yeah, thank you. We'll have to have another chat in the future.
Sure, I'd be delighted.
I love bringing people back. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Marco Beneteau, and you're feeling inspired to risk feeling awkward and vulnerable to be rewarded with new depths of connection and meaning along with new heights of ecstasy and pleasure that you didn't know were possible, or even to begin the journey of deeper self awareness by wondering about your more difficult and confusing interactions with people around you. There will be lots of links in the description box. And if you enjoyed this interview, as always, please like, subscribe, share, and consider being a supporter. And until next time.